Awesome. Okay, and it is recording. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me be part of this. It's truly an honor for me. And so I thought to begin, instead of introducing you, because I'm sure the readers can find your bio on your website, I thought I'd let you introduce yourself in words that resonate most with you right now. And so my first question would be, who are you? Who is Itoro Bassey?
Wow. Let's see. Itoro Bassey is. It's interesting talking about oneself in third person, but
Yeah.
I think I'm. I think I'm inspired, and that wasn't always the case for me. So it's nice to be living a life where I'm constantly inspired and aware and present. Um, let's see. Itoro is a foodie. I'm a foodie. I love to eat, and I don't know why that's important to me, but I like good food. I like to eat well. Um,
Oh,
Itoro is I'm also the daughter of immigrants, and that has largely shaped my life, defined my life. I'm also a returnee. I've returned back to Nigeria. I also consider myself a part of the Black American experience, even though I didn't come to the United States. Um, or no, I came to the United States as part of the immigrant experience. I do very much connect with the larger Black American experience of what it means to be Black in America. And I'm also kind. To me, kindness is a virtue. So that is something I cherish in myself. I try to get better at it. I'm not perfect, and I also cherish that in other people. And I'm also open. I'm really open to life and what life has to offer.
that's beautiful. That's beautiful. Thank you so much for that. Um, and so, before we dive into the novel, I would love to get a closer look at the author, you. So, Itoro, the writer. What is writing to you, and when did you first identify as a writer?
Writing to me it's a form of release. So I guess you could say I look at it in a way therapeutically,
Mhm.
but I also look at it as a way to investigate, to have a question, a thesis that I want to see play out through different characters, you know? So writing for me is also a very spontaneous um, exercise. And I've always been writing since I was 4 years old. I've always written a lot of rubbish, but also I think some gems in there maybe. But yeah, I've been writing ever since I can remember. That's always just been a part of me.
When's your earliest memory of writing? What does that look like? Your first memory of it?
Yeah, I think I was either 4 or 5, and I would
Mhm.
just, I don't know, maybe I had just learned how to write like the alphabet. I don't know at that age what you're
Mhm.
learning, but I remember showing different stories I would write to my mother and to my sister. And I remember also writing like, you know how you're supposed to either write in all caps or small caps.
Mm.
I would jumble it all together and I'd be like, look at what I did. So yeah.
That's awesome. And just like out of curiosity, what was this piece of writing that, like the first piece of writing that you were so proud of, that you remember being so proud of? Like,
Oh,
sometimes you go back to read something, you're like, oh my God, I wrote this.
yeah. It was when I was in high school. I wrote this
Hmm.
story named Nasty Steve, and
Nasty,
it was Nasty Steve,
nasty Steve. Uh-huh.
and it was based on an experience I had in preschool with somebody
Mm,
named Steve,
Steve.
and it was the story actually got me into a conference for young writers, but I was so
Wow.
proud. Yeah.
Wow, that's powerful. I bet. So just thinking about all these kind of literary genres that exist out there, and also kind of with your background as a journalist, I found it really interesting that you chose for your debut book to be a novel. So kind of why choose this particular genre out of all potential ways of putting out the story?
Yeah, I've always loved fiction, especially
Mm-hmm.
because of how you can play with it.
Mm,
I love the way, specifically with writing this novel, you know, it was based off of real people, people that I've met, people that I've spoken to in the field.
wow.
Um, but
Mm-hmm.
I'm so sorry.
No
Can
worries.
we stop it for a second? Let me just
Sure.
get the doorbell. I've always really liked playing around with characters or,
Mhm.
yeah, people who I would find in real life who I felt had very compelling stories, and just playing around with it in fiction. So in the novel, the characters are based off of real people, you know, people that I've met in the
Okay.
field, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
people who I've gotten to speak to. But fiction gives you the license to like really use your imagination in a way that you can't necessarily do with creative nonfiction. Um, so that's what I love about the art form. And also I love magical realism, you know, so
Mm,
I
yeah.
like things that kind of defy
Mm,
what we look at as the ordinary.
yeah. And there's a little bit of that in the novel as well, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
there is.
So I think that connects really well to my next question, which is about what inspired this particular novel? Like, what are questions that you were exploring or answers that you were seeking as you began to write this novel?
Yeah, I think what inspired this novel was, again, a lot of the women I spoke to in my life. And this whole idea of being an immigrant or the daughter of immigrants. So first generation, second generation in a country that you feel like you don't necessarily belong to because of its particular history, converging with also the history of your family, you know, and their homeland. So I wanted to talk about that convergence. And there are just so many of us living and answering or asking these questions of what does it mean to be, you know, the child of immigrants who has so much expectation on one's shoulder, you know, an expectation to, you know, succeed and to achieve the American dream and to be high achieving in school and to be successful, and specifically for Nigerian Americans. I know this is something that we're always confronting in our families, you know. So I wanted to explore what does it mean when you fall short of that, you know, in the eyes of those who you love. What does it mean to come from a family or from families where there are complicated family dynamics because there are things that haven't been healed, you know, spiritually, culturally, and especially in my own case, I was born and raised in the United States. And we didn't travel back and forth to Nigeria too often. I had only been there once since I was 2. And then I
Wow.
decided to return when I was 32, you know.
Wow, 30 years later.
Yeah. So,
Mm-hmm.
and most people, when I say, oh, yeah, well, I've been here when I was 2, they're like, well, that doesn't count. So,
Mm.
you know, so I wanted to talk about like the de-romanticization of a people and a culture, you know, especially African cultures, because there's a lot of romanticizing in the West, you know, whether or not
Mm.
that's us looking at Africa as a place of immense poverty, or us looking at Africa as a place where everyone were kings and queens. You know, I
Yeah.
wanted to like bring the Africa I was seeing, specifically the Nigeria I'm living in, into the
Mm-hmm.
now.
Wow. Yeah, that's really powerful. Um, um, so in writing this novel, based on everything that you said, was there a particular person or a particular audience that you had in mind as you were writing this novel? Like the messages that you've put in there, the stories that you've put in there, um, who was it destined to? Like whose ear was it? Did you want these messages and this story to be conveyed to?
Yeah, there were so many people I had in mind. I
Mhm,
mean, I think the most obvious are like children of immigrants and,
mhm,
Nigerian Americans, Nigerians who have been abroad. I was also thinking of like if I were to tell a story of the experience of being in the West to those who have
mhm,
not been in the West, who are, back home in Nigeria,
mhm.
what would that
Yeah.
story be? Because also there's a romanticization of the United States, specifically, here where I'm right now, Nigeria.
Mhm,
And of course, that's changing with social media
mhm,
and the news, you know, um, rapidly. But when I was growing up, most people would be like, well, what I would give to have the opportunities you had. And it's not to negate that, because that is very real. But specifically, there is an experience of being Black in America, being a Black woman in America. So I wanted to tell a story that shows those difficulties and also what happens when you don't quite know where you come from, you know?
yeah.
And the loss that happens there. So it's this whole, I wanted to write for people, especially here on the continent, who could get a different perspective, you know?
Yeah.
And then really for women, um, I thought that this is a novel too that many women need, especially survivors. As women, we go through so much. Just navigating the day to day can be a lot, and what does it mean to be a woman traveling alone in a place that she doesn't know, where the culture is doesn't quite value women in the same way it values men. So that's
Yeah.
another group
Yeah.
I was thinking
Yeah.
of. But
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah. Wow. And especially that your story features these amazing women through different points in time, through different also places. So you're kind of like the storyline takes place in Nigeria, in Kenya, in the US, right? And it was such an interesting way of structuring your novel, if I can say so. Um, but before we go to the structure, can you first introduce us to the characters? So, like, who are these characters that you've highlighted in their stories? Also, how to like properly pronounce their names as well, for all the readers out there.
Sure. And
Mhm.
I'll do my best to pronounce the names, because I even get told that I don't pronounce my own name right, because of the
Yeah,
intonation that I always
yeah.
miss. So I will do my best.
It's
But
okay. The way you,
so Eric,
yeah.
yeah. So Eric Essien is she would be the protagonist, and she
Yeah.
is Nigerian American, born and
Mhm,
raised in America and growing
mhm,
up in New England, just trying to
mhm,
figure out her life,
mhm,
as the child of immigrants who doesn't have much of a reference for Nigeria and what living in a place like Nigeria would be like, you know.
mhm,
And then we have her parents. Um,
mhm.
the father's name is never mentioned, and that is
And does
intentional.
he have a name though? Like in your head, does he have
He
a name
does.
or
It
okay, interesting.
In my head he has a name, but I didn't
Mhm.
really want to give
Yeah.
him. It was my way to also decenter
Mm,
men,
mm. Yes.
and especially within. I feel with a lot of the books at times I read within traditional African novels, the man is always at the center, and there's always a perplexity about what's happening with the man. So I was just like, how can I decenter him a
Mhm.
bit more? So that's why I
Yeah.
did that.
And that really
And
came
then
through.
there's, oh, okay,
Yeah.
then good. I achieved one goal.
Yeah.
And then there is the mother, Udwak,
Boudoir. Uh-huh.
and she's very complicated. And she's also been married twice. And it's important to note that because, within the culture, divorcing isn't something that you do. So it shows you she's a particular kind of woman who's been through a lot. Um, and her and Eric don't quite mesh because of the generational differences. And same with her father. Then we have Ekom, who is the oldest sister. She's the first daughter of that particular family unit, the second,
Second
the
family.
second family. Yeah. And she feels the pressures of being a first daughter, being the first kid, the firstborn. Then we have Okon, who's the boy, the son, the youngest.
Yeah.
And
he's also not very
he's kind of
centralized
just
in the
experiencing
storyline, right?
everything. And then we have Epawan, who is the ancestor who comes to haunt and follow Eric around. And oh, sorry, say it again.
Oh, no, no, I didn't say anything. I was just like, yes.
Oh, okay. And then you have Epawan, so the ancestor who's haunting Eric. And wants to know more about her American life because she never got to, be in the United States. And the connection there is that she and Eric are half sisters, and she is the daughter from the mom's first marriage that ended in divorce.
I was really interested in how they connected. So when I started reading the novel, in the very first, like in the kind of prologue, you introduced the family, had the family breakdown, right? And they introduced Epawan as the half sister, but then seeing her come as this ancestor to haunt Arid and then have the conversations, I was like, okay, but why is she mentioned as the half sister? And it was until later in later chapters when there was a chapter where Epawan is the one who is taking the lead in telling the story. That's when suddenly like everything clicked and I was like, wow, this is very interesting. And it also explains why she comes to specifically Arid and why they're having those particular conversations. So it was really interesting the way you chose to put it.
And then we have, who else do we have? Mrs. Bamadele, who becomes Arid's Nigerian mom, you can say, when she returns to Nigeria. And then we have Nkechi, who's Arid's best friend, but it's also a friendship of a lot of tension because Nkechi has decided that she's going to stay in the United States. And Arid has decided that she wants to live for the time being in Nigeria. So we see how their friendship unravels a bit. And I think those are the main characters. There's the grandma. My gosh.
Yes.
Yeah. So there's the great grandma. And that is Udwak's grandmother, who really pushes her. And they're also having their own generational rift and tension because Udwak, along with her mother, looks at the grandma as somebody who is backwards, in quotes, and who hasn't progressed with the times, so we see their rift and their tension.
It was so interesting to see that there was this tension, this generational tension, but at the same time, there was space also for this generational wisdom to be inherited throughout the different generations. And although you come kind of like to realize that at the end, when you start thinking back to the words that the great grandma said, or like that the grandma said, but perhaps they did not phrase it in the best way possible, but the if I can call it, the love was there, but perhaps the way the love was conveyed was not the most functional one, right?
Yeah. Oh,
yes, go ahead.
I think I do think that this is a story, especially about it's definitely about how women fail women, but it's also about how women are trying to do better. But if you don't have the language or the tools to do better, then
Yeah, for sure. Can we listen to a little excerpt of the book?
Sure.
Awesome.
So I'm reading from the first chapter, Running. and this is Eric's specific chapter. I've got an ancestor on my back. She wades through whatever spirit-filled world she inhabits to rest herself beside me while I sleep. She notices every inane habit of mine, down to the crease that forms between my brows when I frown. What makes you different? Her knobby fingers wiggle between mine, and she positions her mouth next to my ear. A language, a country, a history, a prayer. I wanted to be you. Everything I eat, wear, say, think, sing, love, hate, she knows. I'm from your mother's side. I died about a 4-hour drive from her hometown. Her people go to church and rest on the street with that half-burnt building, with that half-built apartment where the workers drill but never finish the job. I visited them often in the summers with my aunt. They're still over there, living and waiting. She sniffs out my trail, watching to see if anything she says will finally click. These people, she claims, wear the same face and frown that I do. I haven't seen them since I was 2 or 3, and I may never see them again. No one speaks their names over here unless one of them dies. So if they haven't died, I haven't heard of them. Possibly my mother mentioned these people when talking about the good old days, like that time she was driving and talked about her girlhood days of getting water from a river with her cousins. Perhaps they were the dearly loved cousins in those pictures I saw in our family scrapbook. They walked 4 miles to a river they called Nature's Mirror because it was so clear you could see all of nature in it. It's polluted now. Crumpled papers, empty soda bottles, plastic bags, and food scraps now litter her memory of swimming in that river. No one takes good care of it anymore, I guess. I'll never get to see the river through her eyes, that's for sure.
I need a moment to just process everything that I heard. Yeah, that was really powerful. Why this particular excerpt to share?
I feel this excerpt gets at the, the essence of what the novel is about. The ancestor on your back. I think we all have it if we were to look at our family lineages. But this idea of expectation and a past that is unreconciled, and how you're kind of thrust into it, born into it, and you kind of just have to figure out how you put it all together and make sense of it. And that's where we find Eric. Like, she doesn't know the responsibility she's inherited, and I find it interesting because she's in the United States, which is a hyper individualist nation, so she's thinking she can just stand as herself, but she doesn't know that she's standing with other people, seen and unseen.
Yeah, very true. And there's this quote from the book that says, I think it was Eric who said it, but I've put too much of myself into surviving on this land. And if there is a story I need, it's about making life work out here. And I think this one speaks to what you just said of, you're in this new land where you have to, in a way, achieve that American dream, and you need a story that would enable you to move forward. But you feel like all this, this is also something that you had mentioned in the chapter about the war, where you say our generation is primed to pass on contempt from where we come from. And so it's kind of like that contempt. You don't want to deal with that contempt, and instead you just want a story that would enable you to move forward. And I was wondering, how is that, or like, was that reflected in your own personal experience, or kind of like you and Eric, it seems like there are so many different kind of like elements in which you kind of meet, like your personal experiences. So I was wondering, like, like there's Ara's experience and then there's yours. And so how much of Ara's experience is yours, and how
Mhm.
much of it is kind of brought from the stories that you've heard around you? The
Yeah, I
reason,
would.
just, yeah, just like for context, the reason I'm asking that is because often through writing, there's this sort of breakthrough that happens, some sort of even like that process of like reconciliating with um, things that we've been kind of putting off for so long, comes through writing. So I was wondering, did that happen as you were writing Eric's story?
Yeah, I would definitely say I wrote this character very close to the bone. You know,
Mm-hmm.
like Arrett is in New England. I also was in New England. you know,
Mm-hmm.
Arrett returns to back to Nigeria. I returned back to Nigeria. So I did give her
And
the
also the two,
bones.
like the when she was 2 or 3 years old, that's like when the last time she had visited, right? Yeah.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
because there was something in my own life that I did want to explore, like
Mm,
this whole idea of alienation. So definitely the
mm,
alienation that Eric is going through is what I went through. And I wanted to put in that emotion and also that kind of dismembering from one's society, from one's ancestry, that I think many of us who have come over here, feel in some way, especially when people look at us and say, you should be so lucky. Like I think of Amy Tan, The Joy Luck Club, and I read it a while ago, but she also is talking about the immigrant experience of Chinese
yeah.
immigrants, and talking about mothers and daughters. And I think one of the mothers says to a daughter who's going to have a much better life than she had, like, you're so lucky, you really are, you know? So when I wrote this novel and thought about Eric's life, I wanted her to really have to process that question, is the grass really greener on the other side? What have you learned? What have been the high points and the low points? So in those ways, I would say we parallel a lot.
Um, I'm looking through other quotes that kind of like spoke to me or like stood out to me. Um, First about this relationship with the roots and family, even if you don't know them personally. Um, so there is this line that says, "Their blood and blood binds." And then, if you leave them for good, who will you become? Like I legit like wrote down these and I kept just um reflecting on them, journaling about them, like how are they being reflected in my own life. But I really want to know kind of how is blood binding? What do you mean by blood binds in your personal experience?
Yeah, I mean, even now, like living in a different place away
Mhm.
from my, immediate family is most of them is very interesting, you know. I think if have I disappointed anyone? Have I, you know, I've had to rethink even how I see family to expand that to chosen family, also because I'm not around my immediate family that often anymore. Um, and I know Eric is struggling with this whole idea of feeling bound to something again that you've inherited, but you don't quite understand what you've inherited. I felt that deeply upon returning,
Mm,
especially when I had and I could feel, I don't know, I always say like psychically, I feel like I got some sort of download. Like I understood
okay.
why my parents are the way they are, or at least what made them,
Mm,
what shaped
what
them.
shaped them,
And
yeah, what influenced their kind of mental models and aspirations, and yeah.
yeah,
Mm,
I saw the particular struggle of wanting to get out and how I was like, that's very much in me, so no matter how much I try to get away from it, I'm going to confront it. And living here, I've had to confront every inch of that, even though they're not
wow.
physically here. I would definitely say, in a way, it's kind of in the blood, you know? And it was interesting being in a place like the United States. And, I'm grateful, it's not as if I'm like, oh, I can't stand the US. No, it's not like that at all.
You do
But I
speak fondly
finally,
of it. Yeah.
yeah, no, there's so
Mhm.
much that I love, and there's so much I really do give just I just have a lot of love for like the Black Americans there who, really supported me and were my friends and loved me and showed me a level of solidarity. If I didn't have that kind of connection, I don't know how I would have fared, you
Yeah,
know.
yeah, yeah.
I,
And
I
if I can
don't.
interrupt, there is this line that you had written in one of your Medium articles that describes this relationship that you have with the States, which is, I still fiercely love the land I left. That place, for better or for worse, shaped me. The US was a very important training ground, and the Black people I met there, they were my greatest teachers. On American soil, I learned what it meant to have faith in myself and the people whose footsteps I stand in. And especially that last part, it's like learning the, like, where am I standing? Where are you standing? In whose footsteps? Like that is really powerful. And so if you can reflect on um, those footsteps where you were standing, how would you describe them?
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to this whole idea too of the blood binds,
Hmm.
because I do feel like with Black people anywhere, we're all the same seed, you know. Um,
Yeah.
so wherever we find each other, like I feel like those connections are important, and I'm thankful that I had those connections. So when I was in the U.S., it was important that I understood the Black experience in the U.S., especially because I was kind of born into that experience in a way. In ways I was definitely not, but in some ways of the everyday experience being Black in America, I was. So, I felt like it was important to learn the history of immigrants and what it means to be in a place that doesn't readily accept you. And the further away you are from whiteness, really at times won't accept you. It's important for me to learn that and to see whose footsteps I was standing in, because it's not like I have to recreate the wheel. There are so many
Mm.
people who have shared their experiences, um, launched social movements to get at this question of whose footsteps am I standing in, so that's what I meant when I wrote that. Like, there are people who have made it possible for me to even be in the United States and have the luxury of asking these questions and even the luxury of returning.
Yeah, yeah. Um, on returning, um, there is this other thing that you had wrote, to love a place that you intuitively know failed your parents somehow, which means that somehow this place has ultimately failed you, has to be the highest measure of faith. Now, kind of like breaking down the sentence. So it is about learning to love and reconnect with the roots, right? And then there's this element of faith. And I'm pretty sure you have your own definition of faith in here. So, what is this faith that you're talking about?
Um, I mean, I think generically, I was talking about
Hmm.
a faith in that which is yet manifested, which is unseen, you
Hmm.
know, which should be there but isn't there. And in this case, I'm talking about generational breakdown and sometimes the rampant lovelessness that I feel, and because of the traumas. Um, I'm also talking about faith as a way of like radical love. So specifically in Eret's family structure and stuff, there is love there, but because of people's traumas, because of also people's particular mindsets around how the world works, it's hard to get there, So then the hope is for Eret's generation is that she'll be able to take it one step further and find that love in a way that's actualized where everyone can feel whole. So faith in finally finding a sense of wholeness with all this brokenness. And I feel like when we're talking about diaspora and stuff, we're talking about particular historic failures, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Where love is actualized. Yeah. Yes. And is that why you chose Faith as the title to your novel?
I think
Because there
so.
is this because there is this character that's called Faith in the story, but
Yeah.
she's mentioned very briefly.
Mhm.
So what faith is the title? Like, is it linked to what you were just like speaking about? Finding wholeness in the midst of brokenness? Is it somehow related to that character called Faith as well? That is just like one thing that I was very curious about.
Yeah, faith, I would say, is definitely about finding wholeness. And even in the way, like you referenced, the structure of the story, it's very disparate. But how do
Yes.
you bring it all together as a whole and have faith that it's good enough, that it'll make sense, that it'll come together, you know? Another thing too, often I get asked here, is faith a Christian novel? Because when most people hear this title, faith, they're thinking, some people are thinking self-help, in the Nigerian context,
Interesting.
Christianity,
Wow.
you know. So it was also a way to complicate this Christian narrative because so much of the story does deal with spirituality and religion and where does one's faith lie when we talk about that, and like really interrogate that. Like Eric wants a God that reflects her, and she has faith in that, even though it hasn't been seen, it hasn't been verified. And most people would tell her that what she's doing is being a heathen. Um, and then just to answer your question about does faith, the character, have anything to do with faith, the title? No, it doesn't. Actually, I had named the story Faith before I had written that chapter.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the title inspired the chapter because I wanted somebody who I felt embodied faith. And out
He
again
did
in
embody
Nigeria.
faith, yeah.
Yeah, and also in Nigeria, you find people with names like faith, peace, blessing, patience. So I would also wanted to give homage to that because there are so many women who actually embody these words: patience, faith, blessing, grace.
Yeah, yeah. Um, there is also let me find it. Another part that reflects faith, especially in looking to understand where you come from and reconnect with that almost like forgotten part of you. And it says, I forgot who was asking who. Like I don't want to just put names. So it says, how far in the past are you gonna go? She asks. As far as I can, I say. And what if you find it's all rotten? Then I'll go beyond that, I answer. That part to me just screams faith because it's really about trusting the path, whatever that path leads, and just taking one step, putting one foot in front of the other, not knowing where it's going to take you, but you're almost like you feel like you are on this mission to honor something deep within. And so you're going to go beyond everything that is rotten, beyond the brokenness, beyond just anything like that reluctance, that resistance. You're just going to go more and more. So this particular exchange, um, I don't know how to ask about it, but more, it's kind of like not how it came to you, or like was that a conversation that took place somewhere in your life? or was that a personal resolve that you've had at some point, perhaps before moving back to Nigeria? Because it takes courage and radical honesty with self to be able to utter those words of, I'm gonna push through that kind of brokenness and just go beyond that.
Yeah. So it was between Eric, who was saying, I'm gonna push through, go beyond,
Okay. Hmm.
and her mom.
And her mom.
And
Okay.
if I remember correctly, the context
Hmm.
was Eric has officially moved to Nigeria, and she's been here, I think, maybe a year in. And the
Hmm.
mom, who's still in the United States, is just like, well, when are you coming back? Because there's nothing there for you, kind of like that conversation.
Yeah.
Um, but, you know, I actually did have a similar conversation with a friend out here. He was telling me about, and it just stuck with me. We were actually talking about Christianity, because one of the many questions you get out here is, so where do you go to church? You know, if you're not, you know, yeah. The idea of you not going to a place to worship, to pray, to,
Hmm.
you know, especially if you're Christian, just
Yeah.
does not work. And we were talking about Christianity, and he had asked me, and I was just like, well, you know, I guess I haven't found a church yet. That was my excuse then. So I wouldn't have
Yeah.
to engage in too much conversation.
Uh-huh.
But then he was just like, well, good, because, you know, you wouldn't want to be anything else. You know, you don't want to be like a traditionalist, or, you know, what we were doing being like when we were natives, you know. So it was kind of like a very interesting conversation we were having about how we looked at the past, you know, and looked at our own traditions, you know, as something that wasn't good, that was evil. And I remember him saying, you know, it was rotten. It was always rotten before the colonizers came and gave us Christianity. And I was just like, really? And he's just like, yeah, we were doing really horrible things. And I was just like, really? And I was like, well, what about even before that? And then he was just like, there was no before. Before was rotten. And that's where it
Wow.
ended for him. And this happened right before COVID, our conversation. And the interesting thing too is this is somebody who I deeply cared about. So it's almost like it was a way to show that these conversations happen intimately, you know? And they're often, if you're honest, they're often happening with people who you would do anything for, you know, even though you both quite don't mesh when it comes to how you think about the world. So it was also my love letter to him, you know, to all of like, especially like, there's just a lot of people in this country who are like, if it's not Christianity, it's the devil. And that's what they'll say, because everything that we were before wasn't good enough, you know, and didn't measure up to what like the white man was. So it was my way to say, we can keep going. Like, I'm gonna keep this faith walk and figure out what was before the before the before, because we've been here and we have a before, you know.
And is that somehow related to, again, another quote? Seems like the only way to rise in anything is to let yourself die in the face of it. How is it related to this as well?
Yeah, I'll
'Cause
definitely
the
take
choice of
ownership.
words, yeah, the choice of words is very particular. Hmm.
Yeah, I'll definitely claim this one as like my own internal sentiment. Um, but yeah, there have been many deaths, little deaths, you know, to kind of become the person I've become, you know, because it takes a lot of courage um, to leave a place, to return to a place, to, and when I was like talking with all of the people I spoke to like write this book, when I think about my own mother, you know, the mother figures in my life, like the women in my life, we've had to give up a lot to become who we are, give up ideas, give up relationships, give up, you know, give up countries, there's just been so much, you know, and
And
I
like
was just,
forced, I'm assuming also forced to give up, not like choosing to give up, right?
yeah, so again, so yeah, that's the dichotomy, the force
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to the choosing, you know, and it kind of comes all together in this stew. So it was just a recognition of that, you know, and an homage to all the people I've known who have had to go through that, including myself.
Yeah, yeah. I guess the sentence to me, it also um, meant um, in kind of this journey of the return, choosing what mental models to let go of that is like part of the dying and which to seek to rise kind of more. And so um now like as you are choosing to return and as you've returned, um are there any like what kind of like changed in Itoro throughout the return and now that you've returned? Like first of all, like do you feel that you've returned or are you still in the process of returning?
Mm, I do feel like in many ways I've returned. It's both. I
Mm-hmm.
feel like I've returned in the fact
Mm-hmm.
that I'm like, oh, this is home.
Mm-hmm.
And
That's
I felt
powerful.
it in my, yeah, I felt it in my bones. Like I felt it in my bones in general. Like I was like, oh, the continent, I think is where you're the happiest, you know,
Mm-hmm.
ideas aside of like kind
Yeah.
of the, you know, oh, I want to be in Africa because I think it'll be, you know, at least I won't be in the minority. You know, I had those ideas in the West, but when I
Mm-hmm.
came back, and
Mm-hmm.
especially when I was in Nigeria, in my body, I felt something cellular happen,
Mm-hmm.
you know, where there was
Wow.
no thought I could have had other than this is it. Um, Now I'm still in the process of returning because one of the humbling points for me has been, look, Nigeria is one of, at least for me, and I think many would agree, one of the toughest places to live. You know, whether
Wow. Okay.
whether it's not having electricity, not having running
Mm-hmm.
water, not
Mm-hmm.
having
Mm-hmm.
just the general day to day. I mean, right now we're going through
Okay.
this whole fuel crisis where,
Mm-hmm.
you know, we had dirty fuel, so
Mm-hmm.
contaminated fuel. So a lot of cars were breaking down and the fuel queues were very long.
Oh,
And,
wow.
you know, it's interesting how you get affected and impacted, especially when you decide to give up your more Western comforts. Not to say that
Mm-hmm.
I can't access them here, but I did make a specific choice to live locally, you know, and to kind of get out of the bubble. And once I did, it was a humbling because one of the things I always get from people here is that, you know, Africa is way too romanticized. Like we're living now, like, you know,
Yeah.
um, this whole idea of we were all this kings and queens and stuff. For some of us, that was true, not for all of us. You know, like
Okay.
there's just
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
certain,
Yeah.
you know, there's certain confrontations, important confrontations I've had that has
Mm-hmm.
humbled me. And to me, that's the returning piece. So it's a bit
And I
of
think
both.
also, yeah, I think also like your job as a journalist, like the nature of your job makes you meet different people, listen to different stories, not just the ones that like not just the stories that are being communicated to you through different media, but you are the one who are looking for the different stories. And so you have access to almost like the entire population, all the different variations of the same kind of public discourse, but you're getting all of its different facets, all of the different perspectives, and you're making kind of your own understanding of kind of everything that is shaping this current reality that you find yourself in right now, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I
Mm-hmm.
would definitely say, I think one of the biggest lessons I've learned is that people here are also trying to figure out their lives, just as anybody would in the West, you know, and figuring out how to
Mm-hmm.
self-actualize. Again, this whole idea of self-actualizing love, self-actualizing one's whole self in this
Mm-hmm.
particular kind of environment and trying to make sense of the past. And there are many people too who are deciding to move forward, whatever that means, like Eric was
Mm,
trying to, you know, so
yeah.
these tensions exist everywhere.
Mm, mm, mm. Talking about challenges and kind of like going back to the novel, what part of the novel, what particular chapter was most challenging to write?
I think
Specifically, like
faith.
more most emotionally challenging. Mhm.
Oh, okay. Um, huh. I mean, it's such a heavy novel. All of it
Yeah.
was kind of pretty intense. Um, but I think
I
for
bet you, sorry to
sure,
interrupt, but like even as a reader, it was really intense. Like,
yeah,
I mean, like so many experiences that I don't identify with. First of all, I'm not Nigerian, but still, um, it's just like so many themes are so universal, because it talks about family, it talks about the homeland, the whole concept of home, what is home, relationships, spirituality. It's just like so much is packed into very few pages. And yeah, it was really intense. So that's why I was really
yeah,
curious to know the
yeah,
process of like putting all of that tension onto these pages.
yeah. I mean, maybe that's why it took so long. Because,
Oh
like,
yeah, how long did it take?
I would say it was a span of maybe even a little over, but I'll just say 10
Mhm.
years because it started off as a
Oh,
short story
wow.
collection. Oh,
Okay.
yeah. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
So,
So
so I
10
have been writing.
story, 10 years in the making.
Yeah, 10 years in the
Wow.
making. But
Wow,
I
that's
would say I
powerful.
think that, yeah, I think the story
Mm,
that gave me the most, like, whoa, was writing
mhm,
Uduak's pieces,
mm,
you know, because there's
mm,
such a jump in a way you have to make to understand somebody and have empathy for somebody who's, lived a different life from you. But then when you
mm,
start getting
mm.
certain things, like, oh, okay, like, so I'll give an example. Being back in
Yeah.
Nigeria as a woman, somehow I was able to understand, at least I feel, my mother a bit better.
Okay.
I was just like,
Yeah.
yeah, this kind of environment can produce someone who, I mean, I don't know. And if you're already kind of sensitive to the world, how
Mm,
was that? So,
mhm,
I
mhm,
used kind of those emotions to like write
mm,
Udwak. Um,
mm.
and yeah,
When you spoke of understanding, like better understanding your mom, was it more from an like her character, or like more of like the reasons why she felt the need to like leave Nigeria and perhaps not come back? She's still not back to Nigeria, right? Still in the States.
mhm,
Um,
yeah.
or was it just
I,
like all of it? Understand all of it?
I think it was all of it. I think the
Mm-hmm.
thing to like definitely from her character,
Mm, okay.
because
Yeah.
especially when I speak to other people who have had to make those kind of choices,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
it's heart wrenching, but in a way they have to take the emotion out of it. So I was just like, how can I write in a way that puts some of the emotion back into it? And yeah, that took a lot.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. 10 years. I'm still processing the 10 years. I think I read somewhere that the novel was gonna be titled The Soil Below or something like that, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
So like what made the shift from The Soil Below to Faith?
Yeah. I mean, the soil below was about to be about roots, whose footsteps are you
Mm-hmm.
standing in, the literal
Mm-hmm.
soil of changing
Mm-hmm.
soils.
Mm-hmm.
But when I asked myself, what really though is at the essence of this novel, I was just like, I think it's faith. And it was hard to choose that title because I was just like, it could be so easily misconstrued. But then I was just like, just go for it. So
Go for
yeah.
it. Yeah. And I think that faith also shows in the very last line of the novel, where you say, but instead of doing that, or at least like in Eric's voice, but instead of doing that, I leaned closer and said, continue. And that to me sounded like in the beginning of the novel, there are these themes of resistance and reluctance. And then by the end, this particular word continue and like leaning closer and saying continue communicates openness and surrender. And that's the essence of faith, right? There is that reluctance and that resistance in the beginning, but the stronger your faith gets, however you define faith, there is this, it results in openness and surrender. Um, and why did you end it like that? Because I like when I read this line, I just like flipped the page and I'm waiting for another chapter, you know? And I'm like, okay, what is she gonna say? You know, how would the conversation look like? And then I'm like, wait, what? Like that's it? So
Yeah.
that was a really interesting way to end the novel.
I think, it took me a while to also arrive at a good conclusion,
Okay.
and but for me, after like thinking through it, I was like, I think the conclusion is actually a beginning. It's Erit getting
Mm,
to start her life on her own terms, at making
wow.
peace with parts of herself, not all of herself, but parts
Mhm,
of like her ancestry, her own trauma, and
mhm,
also
mhm,
parts of herself that's finally open for a conversation, with this ancestor, So I did see it as like a way to start more conversations that's not so rooted in resistance and reluctance.
mm,
Like Eris was
mhm,
like, okay,
mhm.
fine, if there are ancestors who want to talk to me, cool. Whereas in the
Let them
beginning,
talk.
she's just like, yeah, let them talk. In the beginning, she was just like, don't talk. Am I losing my mind? Am I,
Mm,
So
mm,
it's also a piece with like different realities that she's made where she's like, continue. And then on a practical
mhm.
level, I was like, I think this needs a sequel. Because
Ooh,
yeah,
okay, yes.
I do see it as part of a larger conversation because there's so many aspects, especially of the African diasporic experience, that I would love to explore, So
Definitely. Oh, please. I hereby sign up for. Yeah, so that brings us to the end, but I want to actually finish with again one of your quotes. I literally just like went around reading so many of the pieces that you've written all over the internet. And there's the sentence in which you say, part of reconciling one's culture is doing the internal work to heal it. It can be maddening to try and find the logic in a situation screaming for recovery. Where has the culture been wounded? Has become my guiding question in navigating these contradictions. And it feels like this question has also been guiding the writing of this novel and also just everything that you write about and everything that you've spoken about. So yeah, I don't know if you want to share something else perhaps that I did not ask about that you really wanted to share, or if you have a question that you'd like me to answer as somebody who had read your novel, or yeah, like whatever you wanna add, feel free to add it.
yeah. No, I feel like this is like the most, it's so comprehensive. You kind of touched on everything. Um, yeah, which is great. And also the questions you've asked has allowed me to look at the story in a different way. And it's nice to kind of, after you've written something, be able to just see how other people interpret it. So I'm thankful for your interpretation. But
Thank
no,
you.
this has been a wonderful conversation. So really
Same,
happy.
same. Thank you so much. It's been a wonderful hour. And I really look forward to seeing you again and to reading more of your books.
Thank
So
you.
yeah.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Bye.
Right. All right, it's recorded. Oh yeah, before we wrap up, one last question is, how did you celebrate when you finished writing the novel?
I I did a dance in my room. I had a dance party. I love having
Ooh,
solo dance parties. Um,
wonderful.
and I haven't celebrated it quite yet. I'm
Mm-hmm.
planning to, I want to travel back to Kenya, specifically the coast, for my 35th
Oh.
birthday, which is coming up in May. So I'm
Ooh, happy
planning
birthday in
for that.
advance.
Thank you.
Also, well, keep us posted on how that celebration would go, and really looking forward to just seeing your book reach more people who need it, because I really feel that um, for so many people that would identify with each and every experience of the different generations of stories that you've told. It's just going to be like really, really helpful. So yeah, thank you so much. And yeah,
Thank
that's a
you.
wrap.